President Trump has fired the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. In a tweet, Mr. Trump said Mr. Tillerson, with whom he had a series of disagreements, would be replaced with the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, Mike Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo is being succeeded by his deputy, Gina Haspel. The change comes as the Trump administration prepares the ground for what would be an unprecedented meeting between the U.S. President and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. Let's just have a listen to what Mr. Trump had to say about his new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He was speaking at the White House a short while ago. Have a listen.
I've worked with Mike Pompeo now for quite some time. Tremendous energy, tremendous intellect. We're always on the same wavelength. The relationship has been very good, and that's what I need as Secretary of State. I wish Rex Tillerson well. Gina, by the way, who I know very well, who I've worked very closely, will be the first woman director of the CIA. She's an outstanding person who also I have gotten to know very well. So I've gotten to know a lot of people very well over the last year. And I'm really at a point where we're getting very close to having the cabinet and other things that I want. But I think Mike Pompeo will be a truly great Secretary of State. I have total confidence in him. And as far as Rex Tillerson is concerned, I very much appreciate his commitment and his service, and I wish him well. He's a good man.
Mr. President, what did you tell Rex Tillerson? What did you say to Rex Tillerson?
Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess he thought it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same. With Mike Pompeo, we have a very similar thought process. I think it's going to go very well. Rex is a very good man. I like Rex a lot. I really appreciate his commitment and his service, and I'll be speaking to Rex over a long period of time.
That was President Donald Trump at the White House a little earlier. Well, let's go live now back to Barbara, who joins us from Washington. And Barbara, we're just listening there to President Trump, who really made it very clear that, you know, and we know this about Donald Trump, that personal relationships really matter. Seeing eye to eye with someone really matters. And he pointed out that he has that with Mike Pompeo, and he didn't really agree with Rex Tillerson's direction and views.
Yes, that's right. And we were aware of that because the disagreements were quite public at times. But Mr. Trump did specifically mention that now, calling out, for example, the issue of Iran. He said that I thought the agreement was terrible and Mr. Tillerson thought it was okay. Certainly, Mr. Tillerson was one of the cabinet secretaries who counseled Mr. Trump not to pull out of the agreement. There were other issues as well on which they disagreed in approach and sometimes substance. And certainly Mr. Tillerson did have a more establishment view of how to conduct foreign policy than Mr. Trump does, who is, of course, quite a maverick. But he did say that they got along. They just didn't see eye to eye. Mike Pompeo, he has a lot of chemistry with, he says. I have total confidence in him. We get along well. And that, I think, is something we've known for some time. Mr. Pompeo has made a point of cultivating that relationship by delivering his briefings as CIA director in person to Mr. Trump, speaking in a way that Mr. Trump can relate to, and also has is more in line with Mr. Trump's policy positions on areas like Iran and North Korea. And so it's not entirely clear why Mr. Trump decided to make this decision now. As some of his White House officials have said, he wanted to sort of clear the deck and get his team in order for pending talks with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and he wanted Mr. Pompeo to lead that. But it does seem as if Mr. Tillerson was taken by surprise. A statement by his communications director says he had every intention of staying. The secretary did not speak to the president and is unaware of the reason why he was asked to leave.
There's been so many high-profile exits from the White House, and President Trump just said there on the lawn that, look, we're close to having the cabinet that we want. So all this shuffling for him is just part of the process of finding the right people.
Yes, that is how he sees it. Some of the shuffling has had to do with people who felt they could no longer put up with his way of working or his approach to the issues on which they were working. And there has been a lot of people walking out the door over the past year. But former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is certainly the most senior official to do so. It's the first cabinet secretary to leave, and he didn't leave on agreed terms. He didn't say, I've committed 1 year of work, I've done what I said I would do, I now want to go into my retirement. Thanks, Mr. Trump, for the opportunity, but, I've done what I think I could. Happy to hand off. He was fired. He was summarily dismissed. So this is quite a big move, really. It doesn't really fall into the category of other dismissals as far as I see it.
Yes, indeed. And in a tweet, Barbara, thanks so much for joining us. So, what do we know about America's new Secretary of State? Well, Mike Pompeo is seen as a Trump loyalist. He was the Tea Party representative from Kansas, serving 3 terms in Congress. He has been more critical of Russia than Trump, warning that President Putin is a dangerous leader, and he's a critic of the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran. With me is our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. Paul, good to see you again. Mike Pompeo has been very critical of the Obama administration's Iran deal. And really, that was something that President Trump pointed out on the White House lawn just now. He said, Rex Tillerson didn't necessarily do what we wanted when it came to Iran.
Yeah, it's not good for a president to have a Secretary of State with whom he has so many disagreements over a wide variety of policy issues. Still less a Secretary of State who is almost on record as calling him a moron, though that was never quite denied or quite confirmed. So it's been an absolute inevitability for some time now that Rex Tillerson would be sacked. I think people are a little surprised that it has taken Donald Trump as long as this to finally get rid of him. Of course, when the end came, it came in a fairly brutal fashion, perhaps not surprising given the barely disguised nature of their relationship. And it does seem as though in Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump has someone he is a little bit more aligned with. Mike Pompeo is certainly a more hardline than his predecessor, particularly on issues like Iran and perhaps North Korea too. So, in the words of Donald Trump, he is a little bit closer to getting the cabinet he really wants.
Yes, indeed. He just said that there outside the White House. And this statement, Paul, is quite extraordinary, that, he had every intention of staying because of the progress being made in national security. And he wasn't aware of the reasons as to why he was sacked.
It's hard to know with this White House just what to make of any statement, or indeed this administration. The notion that Rex Tillerson can have been happy in his job seems a little far-fetched, it has to be said. I don't think anyone doubts that he was, up for public service. But he has had an extremely bumpy ride with Donald Trump. He's had a pretty bumpy ride even within his own State Department. A lot of profound unease and unhappiness in the State Department at what many people see as Rex Tillerson's failure to defend his patch and defend his personnel. A State Department that has been described as being understaffed and demoralized, has lost a lot of very high-profile people in the course of the last 12 months. And so I think there is quite a groundswell of resentment against Tillerson for not standing up to Donald Trump and for not defending the interests of the State Department and the wider interests of American diplomacy at a time when, arguably, it's more needed than ever.
It's quite extraordinary because if we think about why Rex Tillerson was handpicked by Donald Trump, he wasn't seen as establishment, he was seen as a Washington outsider, and yet a lot of the analysis we're getting now is, well, actually his views were too much along the lines of the establishment, and Mike Pompeo is a hardliner and has similar views to Trump.
He's both a hardliner and a Washington insider, a man with a former career on Capitol Hill, and of course a brief career as head of the CIA. There was that time when Donald Trump seemed, for all the controversy surrounding him, seemed to be thinking outside the box in terms of the sorts of people he wanted to have around him giving him advice. And there was a case for saying that Rex Tillerson, with all his experience of going around the world, striking deals with international leaders, notably Russia, to do with his oil business, that there was someone who had some qualifications. But it turned out to be perhaps not quite the qualifications that Donald Trump was looking for. And in some ways, Donald Trump has ended up wanting to have slightly more conventional figures around him, albeit ones from the right-hand end of the spectrum.
And the new CIA director, Gina Haspel, she'll be the first female director of the CIA.
Yep, Donald Trump keen to highlight the fact that he has women's interests at heart. He's always said, even at the time during his campaign when he was being accused of all sorts of acts of misogyny and bad behaviour when it came to women, that he liked women and respected them and was willing to promote them. Well, here is a woman who's come up through the ranks of the CIA and will be the first female boss. So Donald Trump will make much of that.
And, of course, another day, another high-profile exit from the White House.
Adding to a very long list, which Trump watchers put together, sort of about once a week at the moment. The list gets longer and longer. This is an administration with a kind of a greater sense of turmoil and turnover than I think most people can remember. And of course, the timing is always profoundly sort of disruptive. Here is a situation with incredibly important negotiations on North Korea just around the corner. And also at a time when Britain is looking for firm expressions of US support, and in the midst of all of that, Donald Trump lets off another hand grenade. It's what we've come to expect.
Indeed, indeed. Paul, thank you so much for your updates and analysis.